She remembered a recent town hall meeting, held in one of these very districts. The council representatives, eager to showcase their commitment, had arrived with glossy brochures and earnest pronouncements of investment and support. Yet, the residents' questions were pointed, rooted in a deep-seated skepticism born of decades of broken promises. They spoke not of abstract policies, but of concrete realities: the absence of reliable jobs that paid a living wage, the inadequate funding for local schools that churned out graduates ill-equipped for the demands of the new economy, the predatory lending practices that continued to prey on their vulnerability. The officials, accustomed to polite applause and deferential nods, seemed taken aback by the directness, the unvarnished truth of their grievances. Their eloquent justifications, their assurances of future improvements, rang hollow against the backdrop of lived experience. This was the lingering shadow, the possibility that progress, instead of being a sweeping tide that lifted all boats, would become a selective current, favoring those already equipped to navigate its waters, leaving others stranded on the shores of their accustomed disadvantage. The very systems designed to foster equity could, if not vigilantly guarded, become new instruments of stratification. For instance, vocational training programs, ostensibly designed to equip individuals with the skills for emerging industries, might inadvertently favor those with prior educational advantages, subtly excluding those who lacked foundational literacy or had experienced interrupted schooling. The curriculum, the recruitment methods, the very accessibility of the training centers, could all become subtle gatekeepers. The subtle insidious nature of prejudice, too, proved a formidable adversary. While overt discrimination had been outlawed, the ingrained biases, the unconscious assumptions that shaped perceptions and influenced decisions, continued to cast a long shadow. Alara witnessed this in hiring processes, where candidates with names or backgrounds associated with historically marginalized communities might face an unspoken, yet palpable, disadvantage. She saw it in social interactions, where genuine efforts at integration were sometimes met with polite distance, a subconscious reluctance to fully embrace those perceived as other. These were not the grand pronouncements of old, but the quiet, pervasive microaggressions that chipped away at dignity and eroded the foundations of genuine belonging. The danger of regression, of a subtle creep back towards the old ways, was ever present. The powerful, though temporarily dislodged, were not necessarily vanquished. They possessed resources, networks, and a deep understanding of how to manipulate the system from within. They could fund think tanks that subtly promoted regressive policies, lobby for loopholes in legislation, or exploit economic downturns to reassert their influence. The language of stability, efficiency, and practicality could be co-opted to argue against the slower, more complex, but ultimately more just, processes of true transformation. The very ideals that had fueled the revolution could be twisted, their radical edges blunted, until they became mere platitudes, easily ignored by those who held the reins of power. Alara often found herself in quiet contemplation, sketching out scenarios of potential pitfalls. What if the promised investment in public education, crucial for breaking cycles of poverty, was consistently underfunded due to fiscal constraints, while subsidies for established industries, often controlled by the old elite, remained sacrosanct? What if the new regulatory bodies, tasked with ensuring fair labor practices, were staffed by individuals with long-standing ties to the very corporations they were meant to oversee, leading to a superficial enforcement of rules? These were not abstract fears, but logical extrapolations based on the historical patterns of power dynamics. The unity forged in the crucible of struggle was a precious, fragile thing. It had been a triumph of shared purpose over division, but maintaining that unity in the face of renewed prosperity and the re-emergence of individual ambition required constant effort. The old fissures, though papered over, could easily reopen. Competition for resources, the natural divergence of interests, and the siren song of individual advancement could all chip away at the collective will. It was a delicate balancing act, fostering individual initiative and rewarding achievement, while ensuring that the fundamental principles of equity and solidarity were not sacrificed on the altar of personal gain. She recalled a conversation with a trade union organizer, a woman whose voice had been a powerful force during the protests. The organizer expressed frustration that some of her members, now enjoying improved working conditions, were becoming less engaged in the broader struggle for social justice. Their immediate gains, though significant, had subtly shifted their focus away from the systemic issues that continued to plague those still on the periphery. The us of the revolution was at risk of fracturing into smaller, more self-interested groups, each prioritizing their own immediate needs. The concept of progress itself could become a tool of obfuscation. What constituted true progress? Was it simply economic growth, or was it the equitable distribution of that growth? Was it the implementation of new technologies, or was it ensuring that those technologies benefited all of society, not just a select few? The old guard, skilled in the art of semantic manipulation, could redefine progress to align with their own interests, masking the continuation of inequality under the banner of advancement. A sleek, modern factory, employing cutting-edge automation, might be hailed as a symbol of progress, even if it displaced thousands of workers and concentrated wealth in the hands of a few shareholders. Alara understood that the fight for a truly just society was not a sprint, but an interminable marathon. The dawn they had ushered in was not a blinding, all-encompassing light, but a tentative illumination, revealing the lingering shadows that still clung to the city's corners. The awareness that had been so arduously cultivated was the most potent weapon against these shadows. It was the collective vigilance of the populace, their willingness to scrutinize, to question, and to hold their leaders accountable, that would ultimately determine whether the new dawn would truly break, or if the city would once again succumb to the familiar twilight of persistent disparity. The challenge, as Alara saw it, was to institutionalize vigilance. It was not enough to rely on the emotional fervor of the revolution. Mechanisms had to be put in place, and continuously reinforced, to ensure that the gains made were not eroded. This meant fostering independent media that could critically examine government actions, supporting community advocacy groups that could hold power to account, and ensuring that civic education emphasized not just the rights of citizens, but also their responsibilities in safeguarding the progress achieved. The seeds of dissent, once watered by oppression, now needed to be nurtured by a robust and unyielding commitment to truth and accountability. She thought of the artists and storytellers, those who had used their talents to awaken the city's conscience. Their role was now more crucial than ever. They had to continue to reflect the enduring challenges, to give voice to the unheard, and to remind the populace that the struggle for true equality was an ongoing narrative, not a closed chapter. The songs, the poems, the murals that had adorned the city's walls during the protests now needed to evolve, to document the subtle resistances, the quiet victories, and the persistent battles being fought in the everyday lives of its citizens. The economic reforms, while necessary, were also a minefield. The transition from a system of overt exploitation to one that aimed for equitable distribution was fraught with the potential for unintended consequences. Subsidies, meant to foster new industries, could be captured by existing monopolies. Tax reforms, designed to redistribute wealth, could be undermined by aggressive lobbying and the shifting of assets offshore. The very complexity of the modern economy provided fertile ground for those seeking to circumvent the spirit of the law, even while adhering to its letter. Alara knew that her own role, and that of her allies, was far from over. The euphoria of victory was a dangerous distraction. The real work lay in the patient, persistent, and often unglamorous task of building and defending the foundations of a more just society. It meant engaging in the painstaking process of policy refinement, of community organizing, of challenging complacency wherever it reared its head. It meant understanding that the forces of reaction were adaptable and resourceful, and that the commitment to progress had to be equally so. The whispers of discontent, which had once fueled the revolution, now needed to evolve into a sustained chorus of reasoned advocacy, a constant reminder that the promise of a new dawn must extend to every corner of the city, leaving no one in the lingering shadows of disparity. The vigilance she advocated was not born of cynicism, but of a profound understanding of history and a deeply held belief in the enduring potential for human progress, a potential that required constant cultivation and unwavering defense against the persistent allure of the old ways. The air in the city, once thick with the palpable tension of oppression and the hushed murmurs of suppressed dissent, now hummed with a different kind of energy. It was the vibrant thrum of a populace awakened, a collective consciousness stirred from its slumber. The Accords, etched into the city's legislative fabric, were more than just a legal document. They were a testament to the undeniable power that had been unleashed, a testament to the fact that the people, when united, could indeed reshape their destiny. Alara, standing on the balcony of the newly established Civic Affairs Building, overlooking the bustling Central Plaza, felt the truth of this assertion resonate deep within her. The plaza, once a sterile expanse reserved for official pronouncements and parades of power, was now alive with the vibrant tapestry of everyday life. Street vendors hawked their wares with boisterous enthusiasm, their voices weaving through the laughter of children playing, the animated discussions of citizens debating the latest council decisions, and the melodic strains of impromptu musical performances. This was not merely a return to normalcy, it was the genesis of a new normal, one where the public square belonged to the public. The movement, ignited by the unyielding spirit of Kale and fueled by the tireless dedication of countless individuals like herself, had irrevocably altered the societal discourse. The whispers of discontent had coalesced into a resounding chorus, demanding not just reform, but a fundamental reimagining of their world. The very language of governance had shifted. Terms that were once the exclusive domain of the elite, rights, equity, representation, were now commonplace, debated in homes, in workshops, and in the very streets where people had once feared to voice their opinions. This semantic revolution was perhaps the most profound victory, for it signified a paradigm shift in how the people viewed themselves and their place within the societal structure. They were no longer passive subjects, but active participants, agents of their own governance. The capacity for change, once deemed an impossible dream for the common citizen, had been proven not only possible but potent. Alara recalled the early days, the skepticism that had permeated every proposed action, the ingrained belief that their chains were immutable. Yet, through persistent advocacy, through acts of quiet courage and audacious defiance, that belief had been systematically dismantled. The successful negotiation of the Accords, the subsequent establishment of transparent governance structures, and the burgeoning network of community-led initiatives were all tangible manifestations of this newfound capacity. It was like watching a dormant seed, long buried under layers of hard soil, finally break through to the surface, reaching for the sun. This illumination of possibility was the true beacon against the encroaching dusk of the old order. The challenges, as Alara well knew, were far from over. The ingrained habits of prejudice, the subtle machinations of vested interests, the sheer inertia of bureaucratic systems, these were formidable adversaries. Yet, the fundamental difference now was the awareness. The people had seen the stars, and they were no longer content to dwell in darkness. They understood, with a clarity forged in the fires of their struggle, that a more just and equitable future was not a utopian fantasy, but a tangible goal, albeit one that required constant vigilance and unwavering commitment. Consider the transformation in civic engagement. Before the movement, participation in public life was largely a perfunctory act. Voting was a ritual, often performed with a sense of resignation, the outcome seemingly predetermined by forces beyond their control. Public forums were sparsely attended, the discussions polite but ultimately inconsequential. Now, however, the energy was palpable. The newly established ward councils, designed to decentralize decision-making and empower local communities, were often packed. Debates were passionate, sometimes heated, but always focused on finding practical solutions to local problems. Residents, who had once felt invisible, now actively lobbied their council representatives, presented proposals, and held them accountable for their commitments. This wasn't simply about attending meetings, it was about taking ownership. The economic landscape, too, was experiencing a subtle but significant shift in its undercurrents. While the equitable distribution of resources remained a monumental task, the very conversation around wealth creation and distribution had changed. The concept of trickle-down economics, once espoused with religious fervor by those who benefited from it, was now met with widespread skepticism. Instead, there was a growing emphasis on fostering grassroots entrepreneurship, on investing in local businesses, and on ensuring fair wages and benefits for all workers. Alara had witnessed the formation of worker cooperatives, the establishment of community land trusts, and the increasing demand for ethical sourcing and production, all indicative of a populace actively seeking to build an economy that served their collective well-being, not just the interests of a few. The educational system, a key battleground in the struggle for a more equitable society, was also undergoing a metamorphosis. The curriculum was slowly being revised to reflect a more inclusive history, one that acknowledged the contributions of all segments of society and critically examined the narratives of power and oppression. Furthermore, there was a renewed focus on critical thinking and civic education, equipping younger generations with the tools to analyze information, to question authority, and to participate meaningfully in democratic processes. Scholarships and grants, previously awarded based on patronage and privilege, were now being directed towards those from historically underserved communities, opening doors that had long been slammed shut. The potential for a future generation, armed with knowledge and a deep understanding of their civic responsibilities, was an incredibly potent source of hope. Even the arts and cultural landscape, often the first to be stifled under authoritarian regimes, were blossoming with a renewed sense of purpose. Artists, writers, and musicians, who had once worked in the shadows, now found platforms and audiences eager to engage with their work. Their creations often served as powerful mirrors, reflecting the ongoing struggles, celebrating the small victories, and challenging complacency. Public art projects, once limited to grand pronouncements of state power, were now more democratic, reflecting the diverse stories and aspirations of the city's inhabitants. Murals depicting scenes of collective action adorned buildings, songs celebrating solidarity echoed in public spaces, and theaters staged plays that explored the complexities of the transition, fostering dialogue and understanding. This cultural efflorescence was not merely decorative, it was a vital component of the sustained civic engagement, a way of keeping the ideals of the movement alive in the hearts and minds of the people. Alara often found herself reflecting on the small, everyday acts of resistance and solidarity that were becoming increasingly commonplace. The baker who refused to overcharge his neighbors, the artisan who taught her craft to young apprentices for free, the community groups that organized themselves to care for the elderly and infirm, these were the true foundations of the new dawn. They were the quiet demonstrations of the principles the movement had espoused, enacted not out of obligation, but out of a genuine belief in the interconnectedness of their community. These acts, seemingly insignificant in isolation, were the threads weaving a stronger social fabric, a fabric that could withstand the inevitable storms. The very act of remembering had become a powerful tool. The stories of those who had suffered under the old regime, the sacrifices made by the pioneers of the movement, were being diligently recorded and disseminated. Historical sites, once neglected or repurposed to glorify the oppressors, were being reclaimed and transformed into places of remembrance and education. Museums dedicated to the struggle, public archives documenting the voices of the marginalized, and oral history projects were all contributing to a collective memory that served as a bulwark against amnesia and the insidious attempts to rewrite the past. This historical grounding was crucial. It provided context, reinforced the gravity of their achievements, and served as a constant reminder of what was at stake. The sense of collective power, once a nascent ember, had now grown into a steady flame. It was evident in the way people interacted with each other, in the shared understanding that they were not alone in their aspirations for a better future. This was more than just social cohesion, it was a profound realization of their agency. They had learned that their voices, when raised in unison, could drown out the pronouncements of the powerful. They had discovered that their collective will could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. This newfound self-belief was perhaps the most enduring legacy of the movement. The possibility of a more just and equitable future, while still a distant horizon, was no longer an abstract concept. It was a destination, however arduous the journey. The illumination offered by the movement had revealed the path, illuminating the steps that needed to be taken, the challenges that lay ahead, and the inherent strength within themselves to navigate it. It was a promise whispered on the wind, a promise that echoed in the vibrant marketplaces, in the animated debates of the ward councils, and in the hopeful eyes of the children playing in the plaza. This was the dawn, not a sudden, blinding light, but a gradual, persistent ascent of the sun, gradually pushing back the shadows of the lingering dusk, heralding a new era, an era defined not by the absence of struggle, but by the enduring presence of hope and the unwavering commitment to build a future worthy of the sacrifices made. The journey was ongoing, but the direction was set, the course charted, and the people, awakened and empowered, were ready to navigate the path ahead, guided by the light of their collective will. Back matter. This chronicle, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of collective action, would not have been possible without the tireless efforts and unwavering support of many. To Cale, whose initial spark ignited a movement, and to Alara, whose steadfast leadership illuminated the path forward, my deepest gratitude. To the countless individuals whose stories, whispered and shouted, formed the very fabric of this narrative, this book is a dedication. I also extend my thanks to the archivists and librarians who preserve the fading echoes of the past, and to the community organizers whose ongoing work ensures the principles of this awakening continue to flourish. Finally, to my family and friends, for their patience, encouragement, and belief in the importance of this story, I owe an immeasurable debt. Accord, a formal agreement, particularly one that establishes a new societal or governmental framework. In this context, it refers to the foundational document that reshaped the city's governance. Civic Affairs Building, the administrative center for newly established public services and citizen engagement initiatives. Civic engagement, the active participation of citizens in the life of their communities and the governance of their society. Community land trusts, a mechanism for community ownership of land, ensuring long-term affordability and local control. Grassroots entrepreneurship, the development of new businesses and economic initiatives originating from local communities, often with a focus on social impact. Old order, the previous system of governance characterized by oppression, centralized control, and limited citizen participation. Paradigm shift, a fundamental change in approach or underlying assumptions. Ward councils, localized governing bodies designed to decentralize decision-making and empower communities. The historical context and societal shifts described in this book are informed by a deep study of societal transitions and citizen-led movements. Key sources include The Anatomy of Revolution, by Crane Brinton. On Revolution, by Hannah Arendt. Archival records of the Accordia City Council, first cycle to present. Oral histories collected from participants in the movement maintained by the Accordia Historical Society. Scholarly articles on post-authoritarian transitions and democratic consolidation in comparative politics. Michael Neal is a seasoned journalist and acclaimed fiction writer whose work often delves into the complexities of societal change and the enduring power of human connection. With a keen eye for the subtle shifts in collective consciousness and a narrative flair honed through years of crafting compelling fictional worlds, Michael Neal brings a unique perspective to exploring the rise of citizen agency. This work, inspired by observations of real-world transformations and a deep belief in the possibility of a more equitable future, marks a significant exploration of how ordinary people can forge extraordinary change.